You ready? I'd like to welcome everybody tonight to February 22nd, Tonganoxie City Council meeting. Lindsay, will you call the roll, please?
Rocky Hempel,
Here.
Jacob Dale,
Here.
Lorelei Stevens, Chris Donnelly,
Here.
and Jennifer McCutcheon.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Dan, do we have anybody from the public wanting to speak tonight?
Mayor, we have no signups.
Okay, thank you. Okay, has everybody had a chance to read the approval of the minutes?
Make a motion, we approve the, you want the minutes, sorry, the minutes as presented?
Second.
Okay, we got a motion, got a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So be it. Okay, has everybody looked at the consent agenda? Is there any questions? Chair entertains a motion.
I'd make that motion to approve as presented.
Okay, so moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay, under old business, we don't have any old business I know of. New business, city manager, please.
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. So the first item under new business is ordinance number 1502, amending the Tonganoxie zoning and subdivision regulations by rezoning approximately 2.45 acres of real property generally located at 304 Shawnee Street. So this is the schoolyard townhomes project. In a nutshell, and in your agenda packets, you have the full report that went to the Planning Commission earlier this month, but there was a 2-week protest period for this item because technically it counts as a rezoning. This project had full approvals. Project got built out. The project itself was going to permanent financing. I believe either the loan or part of the underwriting was subsidized by the federal government. It required an as-built survey. When they did that, they found that some of the setbacks, even though we granted variances, and even though we granted smaller variances, they had two specific setbacks that they violated the variance that was previously awarded. And so specifically along Shawnee Street, Building B1 and Building B2. Both of those had a 5.1 foot setback that was approved. One of those buildings was built at 4.9 feet, so 0.2 feet too short, or too close to where it shouldn't go, and the other one was about 0.6 feet, so about 2 to 7 inches off. So our inspection equipment wouldn't identify that. We don't get down to the inches. We do some general location, but the fact that their survey picked it up, their lender had an issue with it, and so we tried to provide a letter to them saying we wouldn't take enforcement action, but that it was actually their lender that required them go back through this process. So it went to planning earlier this month. It received unanimous approval. Staff is still recommending approval. There's really no additional plat action because when we accepted the original or the first plat, that was the easements that we took in for utilities or that you all approved as a body. They're still in place and weren't impacted by any of this. So. But the ordinance is before you tonight. I'd be happy to answer. If that wasn't convoluted enough, I'd be happy to add more information, but I'd also be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Council members, do you have any questions?
You mentioned that there was a petition period,
Yes,
and I'm assuming
nothing was filed.
nothing came up. Yeah.
Nope.
Any more questions of council members? Chair entertains a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 1502, an ordinance amending the Tonganoxie zoning and subdivision regulations by rezoning approximately 2.45 acres of real property generally located at 304 Shawnee Street, Tonganoxie, Kansas, from R-MF2-P multiple family to planned residential district to R-MF2-P multiple family 2 planned residential district with amended preliminary development plan and amended final development plan.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a second. Lindsay, would you call the roll, please?
Jacob Dale,
Yes.
Chris Donnelly,
Yes.
Jennifer McCutcheon,
Yes.
Yes.
and Rocky Hempel.
Yes. Okay. Next thing on the item list is consider Tonganoxie Water Park user fee and seasonal compensation adjustments. Is that yours, George?
Yeah, I'm going to do,
Okay.
thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'll do just a quick introduction. Staff has worked up a presentation on this. As a reminder, earlier this year, we discussed the RFP to do the resurfacing and repainting at the water park. We kind of touched on, hey, our water park manager let us know last year we were kind of falling behind on competitive pay to attract lifeguards. But we also said, hey, we haven't really taken a hard look at the fees that we charge, whether they're admission fees or facility rental fees or even swim lessons. In some cases, we haven't touched those fees in over 12 years. And so we thought if there's an opportunity to talk about compensation, we might want to take a look at the fee structure. So what in the presentation you'll see tonight, we did some, we'll certainly provide what we're currently doing in both of those areas. We surveyed a lot of regional pools, municipal pools, so you can kind of see what other municipalities are doing and how we stack up either in favor or don't look as great compared to that. And then at the end, we've got some staff recommendations for both fee structure as well as the compensation. And then certainly we'll take your questions. And with that, and I'll introduce Darren Shoups here this evening, our water park manager. If you don't recognize him in the cold weather, that's him in the shivering in the back. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan and Darren to give you guys a presentation on this.
All right, thanks, George. Next slide, please, Lindsay. George did a good job covering the what are we here for tonight, so I won't linger on this. But the third bullet I would reiterate, we're here to present information and then consider authorization or further discussion of adjustments to three things: user fees, seasonal employee compensation, and other items are also up on the table for things like how the city defines resident versus non-resident for fees that do differentiate between those two things. And I'll actually turn it over to Darren to give you this overview of these two slides.
Darren?
Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I definitely enjoy my summers, a little bit more my winters. Darren Shoup, Tonganoxie Water Park Manager. Again, appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this evening to address the importance of moving forwards with our staffing here at the water park. This obviously was built in 2008. You know all the additions that were created at that time when we opened up in July 1, 2008. I will talk a little bit about staffing. That includes the manager. We have, since we've opened, we've been able to house 2 assistant managers. And then our ultimate goal is to get between 18 and 22 lifeguards per season with 3 to 5 clerks, admissions, concession stand. I will give some data. 2018, I hired 18 to begin the season. Usually I ended up with 16 at the end. A lot of times at the end, around August, when I lose some of my folks to colleges and so forth, so I drop a little bit there to numbers. In 2019, I hired 19 we started the year with, and we ended up with 15 to wrap up the season. And then this past season, 2021, we hired 17, and we ended up with 12 at the end. So probably by far the most challenging. It was a very successful season last summer with the reopening. Have great crowds, a a lot of non-residents attending our facilities, a lot of compliments. But I found it harder and harder to recruit lifeguards, and especially those willing to teach swim lessons and work with the little ones. That takes an added skill set that not all of my lifeguards I hire have that. So again, that's when I look to recruit. I try to get that to where I look at can they do lessons and be good at that, because we have a lot of young people who want to learn how to safely swim at the water park, and it helps us in later years that they're going to be safe in the water. So I am going to hopefully propose to you tonight just some of the challenges we had last year with folks moving on, looking at other jobs that paid them better than what we offered them at our salary last year. And that was probably the biggest change in what I saw with our personnel. So I would hope that when we look at later on about our salary increase, we would hope that we would be able to be competitive with our neighbors' facilities to be able to recruit our guards and even those outside of Tonganoxie to come and work here and to help keep our patrons safe who attend the Tonganoxie Water Park. So, but we do have operations. We're very busy with the swim team that we have every year. We do that in June. So we're real busy first thing in the morning, and I usually have lifeguards available then and then throughout the daytime. From the lap swim, noon to 1, we have the adult lap swim, and then from 1 to 8 on Monday through Saturday, we're open, and then Sunday 1 to 7. And then again, very popular with the rentals after hours. I turned a lot of folks away last year because we just didn't have enough openings. People wanted to rent the facility. We got very creative, and in August, we started renting them from 10 to noon in the mornings. Sometimes, a lot of times we use those Saturdays in case of rainouts for swim lessons, but once we're done, we've been able to open up, and we rented quite a few Saturdays out in August from 8 to 10. Those little ones enjoy that a little bit better than the 8 to 10 o'clock when it's a little past their bedtime. So again, we open, again, we unfortunately turned some people away last year, and they never was concerned about the fee because they wanted to be and rent the facility because of what we offer them. So that's kind of the total operations. Again, with the concessions and front, I have a little easier, I have more of a pool of applicants that I interview because I don't, with the concessions, I sometimes will hire younger ones in those to do that job. So I usually don't have a big concern. However, the admissions has become more of a challenge to find someone who can be in the front and do that part of the job. So with that, I think that's kind of an overview that I was asked to speak to you. And hopefully at the end, we can make some recommendations. So again, thank you for allowing me to speak to you this evening.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'll take back over for a moment here and highlight user fees and some of that information. And like Darren said, we'll bring back then the compensation. Thanks, Darren. Discussion. So the next slide shows our history of user fee adjustments, and it's actually a pretty basic history. Since the new pool facility opened in July of 2008, that really marked the biggest point of change in fees. Moving from the old facility to the new facility, fees were revamped in a large sense. And then 2 years later, in the spring of 2010, for the 2010 summer season, a few small changes were made. The first was the definition of residency was reevaluated and changed from city limits resident to a resident of the zip code 66086. Some of that was for convenience at the admissions counter and the inability at that time, based on people's ability to discern when someone came, a 12-year-old kid showed up with no driver's license or other form of ID. I live in the city, prove it. Okay, well, I don't have a utility bill or a driver's license, and some of that also, I'll just leave it at that. It was a long, lengthy discussion at that time, but the change was made to expand it from city limits to resident of the zip code. Second change was swim lessons increased from $35 for the public lessons to $37.50 where they remain. And the third was the discount for a multiple pass ticket book adjusted from 15% and 20% discount for a 10 and 20 ticket book down to 12.5 and 15% fee savings in those passes. So pretty modest changes, didn't really reflect a big revision in how the facility collected user fees and what those rates were based on. So 12 years later, we're reevaluating this. I just showed for general information at the bottom corner a graph showing the consumer price index for all urban consumers, all items for U.S. city average. And as you can see, the same time span shows a pretty marked difference. And obviously in the news lately, there have been many illustrations of rising inflation and costs. Where we really see the biggest cost creep operationally in terms of commodities is chemicals. We've evaluated that in the last few council meeting discussions. And actually, Kent Heskett, our Public Works Director, also just offered some feedback the last couple days that he's seeing another market increase in chemical prices on the per unit basis. So we can anticipate that item continuing to rise probably even faster than general inflation overall in cost to run the facility. Next slide, please. So to give you a revenue picture, and I wish I had time to highlight some really interesting charts and information that we've collected, but to give a big broad overview about the facility, about 58% of the annual revenue is collected through admissions. As you can see shown here in red, annual memberships are just slightly behind day passes in terms of annual revenue from last season, 2021. Ticket books are a pretty small percentage at only 2% of annual revenue. The next largest revenue source, concessions, is 20% of annual revenue, and lessons make up 13%. Rentals bring up the rear at 9% of programming revenues. So the way we're differentiating fees in the discussion and also looking at impacts on the revenue side are admissions, which again we highlight as season passes, day passes, ticket books. We're leaving concessions out of the equation because they're not really up for discussion at this exact time. But programming is what we're calling swim lessons, rentals, and those types of fee generating activities at the facility. Any questions about this breakout? Okay, next slide, please. Current rates are shown here, and I apologize it's such a busy slide, but I think it's important to highlight the dollar values shown. We have a marked difference in the rate for residents, again, of the zip code versus non-residents for daily admission and for season passes. Moving to punch passes, those are differentiated between child or senior and adult in price. And moving to rentals, 1.5 hour rentals are cheaper than 2 hour rentals, and there's also a surcharge added for over 75 patrons, which incurs a lifeguard increase for our staffing needs at the facility. Swim lessons are shown in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. There's a difference in the cost, as you can see, for 8 45-minute group public lessons and private lessons, which are 8 half-hour sessions. So that's our current fee structure. Any questions about that before we move on? Okay, next slide. So this next slide illustrates the survey we completed, and I want to thank our staff at City Hall and Darren for their efforts in collecting this information for us to look at. Obviously, water parks and community facilities near us are very different and unique. What we tried to do here, though, for the 13 facilities we did survey, is group them by comparability. So that first column, following the facility name, shows a score from A to C, and then the 4 at the top are what we call the A comparability. Those are Bonner Springs Aquatic Center, Eudora, Valley Falls, and the DeSoto facility. B's are somewhat close or generally close, but might have a larger scale than our facility. And C's are things like Great Wolf Lodge, the Prairie Village City Pool, that are massive in scale compared to ours, or have different types of programming they offer, or season-long indoor facilities combined with outdoor. What we showed here was a comparison of fees in the sense of daily admission for children, daily admission for adults, annual memberships for single, which we then tried to demonstrate if there was a difference in youth versus adult or senior versus adult. annual memberships for family, and then were fee differentials offered for residents and non-residents. As you'll look at in studying this information, there isn't a clear, consistent approach to setting fees. We did see in several communities targeted fee differentials for residents and non-residents, so we're not stand out in that regard. We do follow about 40% of the respondents in doing that. But we also did see certain facilities obviously discounted fees for people like seniors or children in a targeted manner. Eudora is a good example of that. They have free admission for seniors above a certain age. Their annual membership fees in some communities was much higher for non-residents than residents, and some were markedly cheaper than others. That's just some wide variety we saw there. Our response or to self-reporting to the survey is the very bottom row as well, for clarification. And that's the admissions side. The chart got too busy if we combined admissions and programming. So if you have any questions, we can stop here, or we could move on to programming comparison.
In the rental aspect of it, how many are, say, inside that zip code and how many are outside that zip code? Is there more spread one way or the other?
That's a good question, Mr. Hempel. So we don't differentiate when rentals come in,
Okay.
the price based on the person or organization renting it. Some facilities do that, though. We don't do that right now under our rate structure.
Okay,
Just daily admission and passes.
okay.
What percentage of the group rentals are from outside? Or do we even know that? Is that a logical question to ask?
It's a good chunk, I would say probably 50%.
So they're significant.
I would say,
Wow.
it's yes.
Okay.
I don't have that data, but that's something we can start collecting, but yes.
Yeah.
There is, we have a lot of interest of out-of-town folks that rent our facility.
So is that taking away from the folks? Are you so overcrowded on rentals that it's taking away from residents of the city?
I would say, when I turn away folks, I don't necessarily ask if they're,
Yeah.
not much residents or not. So there's a portion of those who, if you turn away the full, probably will. Most of our locals kind of know that they have to get a little bit early.
Yeah. Okay. So by June, you have everything pretty well booked then? What do you do if there's like say a rain day or something like that? You know, or lightning storm on the day you got it booked? Is there room to rebook them or?
Sometimes we can, if there is room, otherwise we look to reimburse.
Okay. Anything else, Dan, or? you got-
Yes, so the next slide, which Lindsay's on now, shows again the programming comparison. So you can see our lessons comparison for the city are on the low end of the comparison. Even for group lessons at $37.50, we're a few dollars short of where most other communities are, sometimes for less length of session as well. Private lessons, I would say, are an area that we are markedly lower cost right now than other comparisons. Several even had the same price for one session, maybe a half hour, an hour, that the city charges for 8 half-hour sessions. So there's some cost recovery that other pools are choosing to do for the convenience or the privilege of a private lesson that they're taking more aggressive approaches to than we are, certainly. Rentals are all across the board. You'll see listed here ranges from as low as $60 or $100 for a set period of time. Sometimes that's not the same exact amount of time as others, all the way up to $400 or $600 for other facilities. Our comparable facilities, I'd point out Bonner Springs, for a rental there, $450 is a market change from the city's rate of only $185 or $215, depending on hour and a half or 2 hours. They're a slightly different facility, but that's a significant difference in price, I would argue, for that comparison. Some others add on extra fees for things besides other extra participant levels. I don't know that adding a whole lot of other surcharges would do more than kind of muddy the water for our fee picture. So I think we wouldn't necessarily recommend adding on a lot of other fees, such as weekend differential versus weeknights or nights versus mornings. That's not really a significant revenue change either, which is something we'll look at later in the presentation. Any questions, though, about programming before we move on quickly here?
So ours is just a flat fee of $185 to $215.
It is, and then
And for how many hours is that?
so $185 is for 1.5 hours, and $215 is for 2 hours. And then we charge an extra $30 if you add 75 or more patrons coming for an hour and a half, and an extra $50 if you add 75 patrons for 2 hours. And actually, in looking at this, I'd like to advance a couple slides earlier than we planned. Can you go to the criteria slide, Lindsay? Right there. Yeah, thank you. So when we looked at, I'll just wrap up this side of the discussion with fee proposals. When we looked at the principles behind this recommendation, we looked first at providing the least burden on local residents for these user fees. That's been the approach of the city in the past by differentiating for admissions between residents and non-residents, and we continued that in these recommendations. Balancing user fee increases with the market and our cost changes. Obviously, this change that we're proposing will make a difference, but as we'll show in a projection here on the next slide, it's not going to recover even the amount we know the pool operates in the red each year due to cost overrunning revenues. The third principle was, as Darren mentioned earlier, the third and fourth principles here are highlighting more on the compensation side, trying to be more competitive for these hard-to-fill positions, and especially our lifeguards and our swim instructors. But if we can advance to the next slide. So this slide, and again, I apologize, it is a lot of information, but I tried to summarize in green headings the recommended fee compared to the existing fee located just to the left of those green headings. So you can see it's $1 for a daily admission increase to both the resident and non-resident rates, all across the board, moving from child, adult, and senior. And to the right of that is the projected annual financial impact. So that took the assumptions of the last 2 years of attendance, averaged that out, looked at our trends, and then projected a dollar change if this fee change were to be enacted. So you can see for daily admission, the impact on a pool season basis would be $9,831 for those daily admission changes. Season passes were also significant, but not quite as significant. We showed changes to the resident, non-resident rates for child, senior, and family, but we only changed the non-resident rate for senior. And that projected annual financial impact was less at only $2,381. Punch passes, we proposed fee changes to the 10 swim pass and reduced that discount rate from 12.5% and 15% down to 10% flat, which was competitive with the market. And that financial change is, again, more insignificant because it's only $735 for the whole season, assuming same levels of participation. We also showed elimination of the 20 pass ticket book because that really equates to a season pass. It didn't really make financial sense for the city to offer that and for people to buy it because a season pass was more efficient on a per admission basis. So that's the admission side, and again, that makes up I would say the most significant impact financially. When we look at our overall financial impact between admissions and programming, daily admission is 60% of the financial change, and season passes are 15%. So those two together make up 75% of the revenue change. They're the biggest drivers of more income for the facility. The programming side is shown on the far right-hand side of this slide. Rentals, we showed cleaning up that $30 and $50 increase when you add 75 or more patrons, and said, just keep it a flat 50. If you're adding more staff, you're bringing them in for setup, for cleanup. There isn't really that much difference in an hour and a half rental and a 2-hour rental in cost to the city, so why would we charge less for adding additional people to the hour and a half rentals? Those rate changes would result in a little over $1,400 in annual change to revenue for the facility. And finally, swim lessons shown in the bottom right-hand corner, cleaning up the $37.50, getting it more in line with the market at $40 for the group lessons, is still on the low end of the range, but it maintains an affordable option to do the very important job of keeping our swimmers safe and educating them, like Darren said, at an early age, so they're better prepared to swim in the facility as they get older. Private lessons show a $20 increase from the old rate, which is a big percentage change, but it's still within the guidelines of the results of the survey we did. So it's probably a pretty significant cost increase, but it really isn't out of bounds with the market rate for those. So all in all, what this fee structure proposal would do is result in a little over $16,300 more in revenue should things stay the same, should our interest level in the facility stay the same and visitorship or participation not go down, either because of fee changes or just general, preferences by these consumers. Any questions about user fees or why certain suggestions were made here?
Do you feel that the 16,000 will be ate up with the additional cost of chemicals?
Not solely with chemicals, but salary changes will eat it up pretty quickly. And I can highlight that on the next couple slides really quickly. So Lindsay, let's back up a couple slides.
Yeah, that's what I'm figuring.
And we'll go to the pie graph for expenditures. That's perfect. Okay, this graph, the pie graph, just demonstrates for the water park facility, over 60% of the cost of running the facility is for salary and payroll cost of our seasonal employees. Utilities are 8%, chemicals are 7% standalone, just the chemicals to treat the water and maintain a safe facility. And then we do have some other costs for things like uniforms, concessions, supplies, and a few other things. But the biggest drivers, again, are salaries and benefits, followed by utilities and chemicals. Next slide, please. So our current compensation practices are shown on this slide. And again, the starting pay rate is where we bring new hires in that have no experience with the city. For our lifeguards, our clerks, and our assistant managers, each year they work with the city in these seasonal positions. They're able to add a quarter or 25 cents per hour to their hourly rate. We have some long tenured employees, and obviously they bring a lot of value and institutional knowledge about the facility, but we also have a lot of newbies every year. As Darren related, he even has flux in who he hires and who sticks it out through the whole season, or even up until college resumes. What we showed also, again, is that our lifeguard pay had been just slightly above minimum wage, which is currently $7.25 an hour in Kansas, at $7.75 an hour. The maximum pay rate of $11.50 an hour, we weren't currently having any lifeguards with enough experience to get to that rate yet. Next slide, please. So when we surveyed these 13 facilities, we asked them for data about what they're compensating lifeguards and lessons instructors as well. And again, here's that same chart showing the comparability, showing the hourly wage, and you can see a pretty wide range. When we looked at our average and other statistics, we were definitely near the minimum. We were not close to the median of $10.40 or the average of $10.30 an hour. One other thing we heard from these facilities as we talked to them was they're also evaluating wage changes as they're competing with rising compensation for other summer work or high school or college age jobs. We also then looked ironically at a few other local employers of some of our part-time seasonal employees work at these places and others choose those jobs instead of us. Sonic, Brothers Grocery, and various jobs in the summer at the Rec Commission are shown. And in comparison to those, we are certainly not exceeding those in our lifeguard compensation structure as is right now. Any questions about the survey or the findings? Okay, next slide, please. Highlighted these points again, but I'll just move on to the couple slides forward. Okay, right here. So when we look at cost of these scenarios, we showed 3 scenarios, and again focused on the lifeguard and the assistant manager positions as the hardest to fill and the ones most in need of an adjustment to be competitive. Scenario 1 is showing a $1.25 an hour increase to the starting pay, which would bring our assistant managers up to about $13.75 an hour and our lifeguards up to $9 an hour. The total cost of that, including our payroll taxes that the city would pay and salaries, is a little over, it's actually $7,750, which is about 8.2% of salaries for the whole water park. If you move that $1.25 an hour up to $2.25 an hour and make $14.75 the starting pay for assistant managers and $10 an hour for lifeguards, which again was a little less than the median and average of our survey results, that's about a $14,000 cost impact, or 15% of pool salaries. And finally, adding another $1 an hour to those rates results in a quite significant $20,150. So to Mr. Hempel's question about how fast we can eat up $16,000 in additional revenue,
You're down to $9,000.
we can do it with $2.25 an hour and just be a little short of that. Any questions about this information and projection? Okay, next slide, please. So in summary, in terms of compensation changes and revenue projections, this slide just combines those projected costs and our projected revenue change if we were to enact all the rate changes as shown. So we'd still have a net profit of about $8,600 if we went with a $1.25 an hour increase, which would put lifeguards at $9 an hour, $2.25 an hour or $10 an hour starting for lifeguards. We'd be at $2,345 in net profit of these changes with some assumptions built in. And scenario 3, we're a little under $4,000 underwater with the changes on cost. So that just shows, these scenarios, obviously there are assumptions built in, but staff recommendation is to consider making scenario 2 the preferred change. So enact all the rate changes as shown, add $2.25 to the starting and maximum hourly wages for the seasonal positions that were highlighted, assistant manager and lifeguard. And Darren has also, advocated that we consider incentivizing instructors out of his lifeguard pool with a premium rate of pay for those people when they perform those activities. That isn't factored into this analysis because there was a little more digging to do, but $1 to $2 to $3 an hour premium would certainly be in line with the survey response we saw from other facilities for people doing those duties versus their normal lifeguard duties. Any questions on this or what's been discussed earlier?
Specific to the lifeguards and your most recent comment,
Yes.
would we, if we went that route, would it make sense to go ahead and increase even further the cost to the person using the service to offset that?
Certainly, that could be.
I mean, do we price ourselves to a point where we can't get it, where we just won't get anybody, which will lead into my next question. From a capacity perspective, we have daily, just normal use, and then we have, and capacity may be people or maybe the pool itself may be limited. How much capacity are we at? Can we put in more people?
We could, with our admissions data we have, unless Darren has other thoughts. I think we studied this extra close in 2021 with the initial limitation that was placed on admissions. And so the facility can accommodate over 300 people in a simultaneous sense. And we didn't see that on our peak days, at our peak times. There may have been an hour or two where we were close, but in large part, the facility is usually operating with capacity still. So yes, the only thing I think we could argue we're maxed out on in terms of our capacity to provide are rentals, which Darren mentioned, are somewhat dependent on schedule availability and who gets in line first for limited chances, as well as lessons, which rely on his ability to have instructors lined up and ready.
Well, I mean, some of that changes, some of the change is driven with pay. If you pay somebody more, you're gonna have more opportunity to get somebody.
Yes.
You know, and where I'm going with this whole, if we have capacity, and you sure don't want to drive attendance up, and if it increases the loss. But it looks to me, without doing all the math on it, that if we had more attendance, we might be able to drive revenues up, reduce the loss, and maybe pay a little bit better. So, is there any thought about, and again, I haven't done that, I was doing it in my head as fast as I could do it. So is there any thought about maybe marketing to increase attendance and either pick a bucket? I'm not sure what bucket you would want to do. I mean, first of all, I'd like to pay good people. And when we just did a approval of pay ranges here at the city that we increased everybody up, hopefully it was reasonable, getting them competitive. We need to be competitive to get good people. But is there any value if we have capacity in either one of those columns to figure out if we possibly could improve marketing? Maybe we can't, I don't know. I'm sure not a pool guy, I don't know. But to, first of all, better off pay for our staff, which they are city employees. And secondly, reduce some of the loss, because as where Rocky was going is hoping some of these improvements in fee would offset some of the loss we're gonna have. But
Yep.
that's not going to. It's barely gonna cover salaries, which it should.
Yeah, it just ate it up.
And then everything else you said is going up, it's gonna still go up. Is there any value in that? So I throw that out to you, cause I can't do that analysis in my head real quick, but if we can market and pick up 25 users per day in one category, or what other category, if you pick up users, can you offset cost and increase pay and get good people? I hope that makes sense. That's rambling, but.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, marketing is not an area we currently do an effort, besides obviously advertisement on the website and.
Sure.
I
But
think,
I don't wanna do it if we're gonna lose more money. I mean,
Yeah.
We can lose money pretty easily. We're pretty good at it, so let's not do it. But that's just a thought, that if we can drive more revenue, if it offsets the overall cost, that's something to consider.
I think that's a good question, and as far as the tracking we do, I think one thing we can say with certainty is there is existing capacity that we could push more of a crowd. The other things that are hard to account for, though, when you're trying to do a scenario analysis like this, is a really cold June, a lot of rainy days. How many kids are transitioning to travel baseball teams and families vacationing? And so what we just try to do is kind of that snapshot, knowing we lost 1 year to COVID. We did see a spike in attendance numbers from the pre-COVID year to the post-COVID year, and we kind of just try to do those averages to present a scenario here. Like Dan said, probably the most important variable, and you guys all know this better than we do, is the pool operates in the red. And we don't even truly give all the cost centers associated with the pool over to the pool. And really the way we did this, again, I'll just reiterate all the discussion we just had, the number one priority in our analysis was to make the least impact to a city of Tonganoxie resident under any sort of cost increase scenario.
Totally understand. It is excellent data. Absolutely excellent.
And actually, to that point, I think I'd be somewhat apt to increase the fees even more on the non-resident side. Because I think a $1 difference between resident and non-resident is pretty nominal. And
Yeah.
bumping that up another $1 on the non-resident side to make it a $2 difference, I think is appropriate. On the, at least the daily admissions, and maybe even a little bit on the season passes as well.
What I was thinking about season passes this year, we go ahead and we collect the data that shows how many of them are out of the city limits and how many of them are in the city limits. And then from there, if we're turning people away and there's groups inside the city that are needing that service, I think they should get priority.
And I'll just interject quickly, we do have a little bit of information about non-resident and resident. Season passes, 90% of our passes were sold to residents. But again, that was qualified as zip code, not city limits, which I think was a item up for debate in the past also.
I think, for me, I think zip code is still appropriate, because it covers mostly USD 464. And, I think there's a lot of students, who live outside of the city that, I mean, they're still part of it and coming to see their friends and hang out with their friends. And I'd hate to see them penalized because they live, just across city line.
Any more comments from the council or Dan or?
If there is interest in changing the non-resident fee, like for example, for child, adult, and senior, an additional $1, I would recommend we also make a corresponding shift in the season pass. Otherwise, you throw that out of whack, the balance between how many daily visits a pass equates to. So
I agree with that.
I don't have the math at my fingertips for that, but we could roughly approximate it at the council's direction if that's the choice they want to make. I would also point out the council still has time to make a decision about fee changes, final fee changes. Compensation is an urgent matter because Darren usually schedules interviews during the month of March and makes his hires by early April so they can get certified as guards. So this is probably the most pressing of the two items between fees and compensation to address compensation planning. But it does make sense to approach it holistically also. So we're ready to move forward however the council would like.
So do you need a motion for that, or do we just give you a nod for go with recommendation, or?
We do have a draft motion, which I think would be most clear. I think the only consideration I would add in the highlights, we left blanks for edits. I think we could show a $1 per hour increase to daily admission and the corresponding changes to season pass prices for non-residents as an addendum to that suggested motion if the council's comfortable with both parts of the recommendation.
Fellow council people, I'd say that I am supportive personally of scenario 2 on the salary side of things, and to further kind of increase the amount of the net profit to offset all of the chemical stuff, include a $1 increase to the non-resident side across the board on the fees, as well as the season passes, as Dan had suggested.
Make that calculation for the corresponding season pass increase.
That'd be perfect, yeah. And we can share that back to the council in case you have any concerns.
Sounded like a motion to me.
Yeah, that's just what I was gonna ask. Is that a motion?
I make that a motion.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
I'll second that. Thank you, Jake, that's good.
Okay, now I'm gonna do a second, and does council members or anybody? Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem, could I interject something?
Yeah.
The question of premium pay for instructors isn't part of the recommendation of scenario 2, but there is financial capacity there, balancing costs versus anticipated revenues. Is there support for moving forward with advertising some amount of a premium rate for our instructors above their lifeguard rate?
I'm going to ask a quick clarification question because we did have some staff discussion, but I don't recall. So I thought the discussion was if you're a certified instructor, we would pay additional per hour wage just for the hours you're functioning as an instructor. And then when you go back to just typical lifeguard duties, your rate would fall back to whatever the going rate is for lifeguards. So just to clarify, it minimizes the overall impact of that as well.
Mr. Dale, do you have any problem with adding that to your motion?
I personally don't have a problem with adding that. I think the instructor piece is obviously important. They bring an advanced skill set and licensing, correct? I mean, they're licensed as an instructor. Is that
Certified.
certified? Certified? Yeah. So I would agree to add that on the motion as well.
Okay, Mr. Donnelly, would you agree to amend his motion?
Yep.
Does council members have any comments? Call the roll, please.
Rocky Hempel,
Yes.
Jacob Dale,
Yes.
Chris Donnelly,
Yes.
Jennifer McCutcheon.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all very
Excellent
much.
presentation. Okay, moving on down. Consider city pet license fee waiver request from Tonganoxie Business Association in support of upcoming pet microchipping event. Dan, I think you were gonna start that off.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, I'd be glad to. This item is a recurring item since 2018 that has a little bit of a twist in the last couple years, but Monica Gee, I'll also introduce, is here, and she submitted the request again to the city to help support this upcoming event that's scheduled to occur in late April, on April 23rd this year. Since 2018, initially a group participating in the Southern Leavenworth County Leadership Development Program requested that the council consider waiving the pet licensing fee for any pets that participated in a low-cost microchipping and vaccination event held in or near the city and open to city residents and non-city residents. Our fee structure is such that renewals take place for licenses on pets in May, and the month of April is by city code set out as a half-price opportunity for renewal. So to incentivize more participation, the cost of the spayed or non-spayed animal license fee is halved for that month. So since 2018, each year the city council has approved a temporary waiver of pet license fees for any pets that participate in this. In addition, last year, the Mayor Freeze interjected with the request that we expand that waiver of fees from just participants in this clinic to actually any that renew in the city during the month of April. The cost impact is fairly negligible, a little under $500 anticipated by expanding beyond the groups that choose to go to the clinic, but it still also balances out. We heard concerns in some years from local veterinarians who maybe claim they lost business because a customer of theirs chose to go to this clinic instead of their normal vaccination with their normal vet. So happy to answer any questions from staff's perspective, and I'm sure Monica would be glad to answer your questions too, but we do have a draft motion including the waiver of all license fees for the month of April for your consideration.
Council members, you have any comments? Questions?
The only thing I personally would like to say is I was a member of the same year of the Southern Leavenworth County Leadership Program as Mrs. Gee, and I think her event is the only one of that year and any subsequent years that has continued to run that program. So I think it's kind of neat that it's a long-lasting annual event as opposed to most of the other programs that have been done that were just one-time things. So it's a great event, and I support the request.
Okay, any other council members have any more questions or comments?
Monica, do you think we're really hurting the vets? I mean, the last thing I want to do is hurt a business in town by some of our action.
The first year we did it, we participated with Hope Clinic, which is a free spay neuter clinic in Leavenworth. And that was who our vet was that was able to help. We've since got in with Pleasant Valley Vet, she does all of it, and she was concerned about it bothering her business, and she said there wasn't a single client that came through there that was hurt.
That didn't come back. I mean, it's just not, I don't believe it's the city's place to hurt our businesses at all, and,
Do I
but
think
it
it
was
is?
important that I hear some of
Because-
that.
I don't think it's hurting the businesses in any tremendous way. I'm not saying a client or two of theirs wouldn't come. It's based more for, and we make sure and target it for this, seniors, lower income families who wouldn't be able to afford it otherwise. That's who we target. So Councilwoman McCutcheon has helped us for multiple years, and wouldn't you see that to be the truth? It's not the
Yeah.
people who
For sure.
take their dogs to the vet on a regular basis.
Yep.
Okay.
It's the people who need it, need
Okay.
that assistance.
Thank you. I
And
appreciate
we work
you.
with the Good Shepherd for them to let them know, we hand that out a whole month ahead of time, anybody with dogs. But something that I like to reiterate is why and only when we will give them why we ask for it free is because we started this so we could get pets microchipped and vaccinated at the same time. So that it's easier for officers when dogs are running loose to scan that dog and see if there's a chip. Over 50% of the pets that came back last year had microchips. And when we started, we had 170 dogs and only 4 of them were microchipped. So, I mean, our goal was to make it easier for the city to help with their dogs running. Now we can find them. I mean, we have accomplished that in 4 years. I think that's a good accomplishment.
Great.
So, we just have to keep going with it.
Okay, council members, do you have any more comments? Dan, you have any more you want to add?
I don't, Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, Chair will entertain a motion.
I will motion to authorize the waiver of pet license fees in conjunction with the rabies and microchipping event to be held on April 23rd, 2022, and to waive pet license fees for any licenses acquired in the month of April 2022.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. We have a second.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Rocky Hempel,
Yes.
Jacob Dale,
Yes.
Chris Donnelly,
Yes.
Jennifer McCutcheon.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Selection of criteria to be used for evaluation of community funding requests by cultural organizations. Dan?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'll be brief with this item. It originated last summer during budget discussions when we received requests from several cultural organizations that were maybe lacking some information the council wanted to see, or the council at the time made comments about looking for an objective framework with scoring or a matrix to help identify how to make a funding decision for a local group. What we did in preparation for tonight was prepare a review of approaches taken by other communities. The agenda statement and materials accompanying that show the results of that survey of 5 different communities all across the country. What we then tried to do on staff's discretion really was to look through that, take out some ideas for criteria and weighted percentages, and hope to present that to you tonight for your discussion and feedback if you have any, so we can clarify with the Arts Council and the Historical Society what their funding requests are for this current year, and then make a decision as the council on how to determine the split of a $5,000 budgeted item for those 2 organizations to be supported this year. They're both aware of this discussion. We've kept them in the loop as this has been moved back from an earlier meeting this year, and they eagerly look forward to a final list of criteria that they can identify their application against for your decision to be made. Next slide, please. I already covered this, so next slide. Fort Collins, I won't stay long on each community's summary, but I will point out just some highlights about each of them. Fort Collins, Colorado is a local government that's recognized for a lot of progressive programs and especially in the arts and culture scene. They generally broke their evaluation criteria up into 3 areas: artistic excellence and innovation, 30 out of 100 points; administrative capability of the requester, 20 points out of 100; and then community, cultural, and social impact, 50 points out of 100, the highest weighted item. I think this presentation of their criteria is really targeted at arts, certain artists or artistic groups all competing for funding. Our scenario may be a little different, but I think this is a good list to start with. Next slide, please. Evanston, Illinois is the next comparison. They also have 3 high-level criteria: the organization's goals and the strength of their programming or proposed project, 30%. The impact on Evanston, especially on the underserved communities, 35%. The focus on who it impacts, and especially the underserved or underprivileged, was a factor we saw in several of these examples. And then third, the intended use of the grant funds, the demonstrated need, and the strength of their ability to use the funds correctly. Next example, please. Sammamish, Washington, which I confess to not knowing where that is, and when I looked at it initially, not knowing how to pronounce it, but they have a very in-depth consideration: artistic and professional quality, quality of the proposed project, programming, or the event; cultural equity impact, which again gets to that diversity or focus on inclusion; and then community impact, the overall experience of the public. They then use those scores to develop consideration against a rating scale, and anything under, say, 70 out of 100% didn't qualify for funding. So they set a threshold. If you don't score a certain level, you're an automatic no in the request until you can revise to meet the criteria. Next slide, please. Cupertino, California, didn't show percentage or weight, but they did show, I think, some pretty important distinctions. First was showing impact on residents versus non-residents. There could be different goals depending on an answer to that question, but they looked clearly at the number of city residents that were served versus non-city residents served, the availability of the program to the community, to those outside the community. They also looked at another important criteria of uniqueness of the program. So if you had, say, a certain amount of money and 3 artistic groups all applied for the same type of event support, that obviously would lower your qualification for funding in their system versus if you're doing something no other group is proposing. Past performance was another one we highlighted in their list, and that's something that a lot of these criteria included, because if an event went poorly and there wasn't an effort to improve it, some of these organizations or communities detracted from your funding the next year in that case. Next slide, please. Finally, the Massachusetts Cultural Council is a statewide group, but they have sample local criteria for towns in Massachusetts to use. The first 3, I think, were kind of interesting and a little different. Applicants have secured a local venue, so within the jurisdiction of the town. Projects specifically serve the youth or the elderly or make things available to them. And then projects focus on local history. I think when we relate this to our list of organizations of cultural significance or adding culture to the community, all 3 of those criteria might be things that the council thinks are important in determining funding. And lastly, this is, I apologize for so many words on the slide, but the bullet points reflect questions that support 4 broad draft criteria. This is a staff summary based on the 5 examples I showed you, and we're happy to take any direction on omitting, editing, changing weights, but I'll run through at a really high level. The weights would be 30% for impact on the community in a cultural sense, cultural influence. That includes who they serve, what they offer, are they unique. 20% on impact to the community for financial or tourism. Those are comments we heard from the council during budget discussions of, are these applicants of organizations bringing people into the community that spend dollars here in attending an event or staying, or are they attracted to live here because of these offerings that the community would have. What are estimated attendees, or what are attendees of prior year events? What's the ratio of resident to non-resident offerings and participation levels? 30% weight to a criteria project plan. I believe Mr. Dale brought some good points up when we looked at these last summer of what are they specifically looking for? They gave us a budget, they gave us a check register, they gave us priorities, but what are they going to use the city's dollars for? I think making that clear that we need that from applicants would be a highly weighted criteria based on that discussion. And finally, the last 20% would be a record of past performance. Obviously, in our community, a lot of these groups have a long history of being here. They have recurring events or recurring offerings and programs, and it would be, I think, a good opportunity to ask them to highlight not only what are they going to use our support for in the upcoming year, but how successful was it in the past. And several of those organizations have done a really good job in the past of highlighting that or providing numbers. I think putting it in our list would just mean you get it in a more concise fashion when you get an application to look at. Staff are happy to take any feedback on this. And again, we're looking for your feedback at the earliest opportunity so we can ask those two organizations to come back to you and highlight these criteria that are being considered for a funding
I
request.
guess my first question is it just gonna apply to two organizations for everybody that applies?
That's a good distinction, Mr. Hempel. So we've interpreted the discussions last summer to include cultural organizations. The brunt of the discussion was again on the Historical Society and the Arts Council. The discussion kind of went in different directions, but at some point, Tonganoxie Business Association was excluded from the list to be considered cultural organizations, and the comments we have notes on were their focus on business development, retention, as well as community events. So their funding request was a little bit different in nature than cultural groups that maybe are more similar. But that's certainly an option that we could include.
I think one of the things that I like about the list, I know if I'm gonna say, you know, I'm doing $500 for a project and it only costs $300, I think we need to be good stewards of our money. And the only way we're gonna know if we get a financial report or a check register.
Okay.
Because I know we're gonna get requests here in a couple months again. At least one that I know of.
I think it's wonderful what you did. If you go and you're just gathering data to try to make a good decision on how to put this together, and those cities that you looked at, just trying to pull pieces. And the smallest one's 65,000 people, and their budget is probably north of 200,000, probably north of $1 million.
Yeah.
I think it's great, and I know what, it's been an issue every time. I don't want to see you or George or staff spend hours evaluating for something that's so small in the city's budget. And so I totally agree with it. Let's be fair and let's be decent. But if we spend so much time reviewing applications, trying to do math for a $10,000 budget item, I mean, we need to spend the money. You know, I'm more than anybody up here want to see data and want to see analysis. But there also comes a point in time that just don't kill yourself. I mean, we have bigger things that we can spend the same amount of time and effort on probably and make that much money by just spending the same analysis, so.
Can we narrow down the criteria?
That's up to staff. I understand what you're saying, Rocky. I just don't want to spend so much
Well,
time
and
and
that's the
effort.
reason I was saying,
I'd rather spend that much on a
sewer
sewer
project.
plant.
Yeah, sewer project.
We'll make that back in 5 minutes on a sewer plant. We will.
Yeah.
So, I appreciate the work you guys did on it. It's a lot of data and a lot of information.
Jennifer, you got any thoughts?
I think I agree that it's a lot for just the few people who come up here and ask for money.
Well, your topics are good, the 4 topics.
Sure.
how do you get it down to where you can spend 10 or 15 minutes on it?
Right.
Get a balance, be fair, and let's go.
We can take that as direction and do so. Sounds
Each one
good.
of those are good. They impact the city.
Perhaps, these criteria could be provided more to the applicants as what they should be thinking about to then tell us, as opposed to us reviewing and scoring each individual thing. I mean, these are things that we're gonna be considering as we're making a decision, so tell us as opposed to us going through and scoring, maybe. Does that make sense?
Certainly, yeah, and I think they'd be open to that feedback, certainly.
I think one of the differences, one of the challenges in the different requests was that Tonganoxie Business Association request was pretty specific and had a lot of information and budgeted items and details on the events, how many people attended, et cetera. And other requests didn't include that. Just said, here's what we plan to do
need
with the
money.
event.
And
Or
we
with
need
the
money.
We need money, here's
Right.
what we're gonna do with it. And so I think it's more about getting to that level of detail or commensurate levels of detail that, than it is about scoring, if that makes sense, so.
And that should be on us, the council, to say yes or no, not you guys to be the ones getting yelled at because you didn't score it the way somebody wanted you to score it. So,
I think each council member can look at what's presented and come up with what they feel that works.
yeah, your comment about bullet points are really, I mean, that's spot on, so.
So do you want to include everybody that applies, or what do you want to do?
Well, I think we gotta hold them all, I mean, why would somebody be held at a different level of accountability than somebody else? And, I mean, that'd be us picking and choosing, and that doesn't make sense. I guess we're gonna eventually pick and choose, but.
Okay.
And just for clarification too, this year in 2022, the council allocated 5,000 for TBA and 5,000 for the Arts Council and Historical Society. So the purpose of this framework would be those two organizations, the latter two, resubmit details corresponding to maybe this list or whatever they choose, and then you'll all be asked to make a decision how to spend that 5,000 between the two. And then, obviously, for the future budget year, 2023, we can ask other groups, all groups, to adhere to these concepts when they submit info. So that would work great. But just to remind you, you'd have that decision again for 2022, according to the adopted budget.
Council members have any more comments? Like to hear a motion.
Putting it together, Dan, that's good.
Did an excellent job. Like to hear a motion from somebody if there's no comments.
Is there a motion necessary on anything?
I think we've got all the feedback we need,
Okay,
so
you
thank
don't
you.
need, okay,
Appreciate the discussion.
that's fine. Okay, we'll move on down the line. Consider approval of TBA Association 2022 funding request.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Dan's got that.
Staying right on topic here, the request for TBA's 2022 allocation of funding that was approved in the 2022 adopted budget last September. Their request letter was just updated for the city council's attention about the need, which they continue to request the same amount of funding, $5,000. They did not request funding in 2021 due to the impact of COVID in 2020 on their programmed activities and costs. They felt they didn't need to request any additional funds for 2021, and so the city's payment in 2022 is the first in over a year. This is a budgeted item in the general fund, and the original request back in the 2022 budget development and the updated letter from Miskey just a few weeks ago is included in the packet for your review. Staff are happy to take any questions, but we have a recommended motion for authorizing the contribution to be made.
Council members have any questions or comments? Chair entertains a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the funding as presented.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Call the roll, please.
Rocky Hempel,
Yes.
Jacob Dale,
Yes.
Chris Donnelly,
Yes.
Jennifer McCutcheon.
Yes.
Okay, motion carried.
Thank you.
They are getting better. I mean, the information's coming in better.
City manager's agenda.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Pro
Mr.
Tem.
George.
Yes, we have two items, and I'll take the first one. The first item is information regarding the Building a Stronger Economy, or BASE, B-A-S-E, grant program provided through the Kansas Department of Commerce. So and there's a memo in your agenda packet that goes into a lot of details, but to briefly recap that, on February 3rd, the Department of Commerce held the first or initial webinar on this program. And in essence, the state of Kansas took $100 million of their ARPA money allocated through their Spark committee, which is generated to increase activity, any loss in revenue, economic development opportunities in the state, and allocated $100 million into this BASE grant program. Municipalities, developers, private landowners, there's a whole host of eligible applicants for this, and really you can submit up to 3 projects total. What we initially thought to do with this was I reached out to the county administrator, Mark Lawfrey, to ask the county to consider making road improvements to Kansas Avenue and 222nd Street, which are the 2 roads that I guess are the boundaries of our existing business park. 222nd Street at some point doesn't have shoulder improvements. Kansas Avenue is a unimproved gravel road. To access the 80-plus acres that we still have left available and undeveloped near the business park that the city owns, the only way you can get there is Kansas Avenue. So 2 weeks ago, the Board of County Commissioners had a work session where any city that was interested in submitting an item could go. Mr. Hempel, Mayor Pro Tem, and I presented that idea to the county. The city of Lansing also presented a sewer extension program that they're trying to put into an undeveloped area. And the Board of County Commissioners prioritized the Lansing project first and foremost. Secondarily, I apologize for not including it in your packet, but there's a hard copy at the dais tonight. We actually just received this morning from the county staff of what the county proposal is. And in a nutshell, they're saying, hey, for that approximate $3 million road project, the county would provide half of the required local match. So in the BASE grant program, when you apply, you have to have at least a 25% match with local funds. So the county's offering to provide half of that for improving those county roads, and that the city would have to take over all the future maintenance of those associated maintenance costs with those roads. In addition, in the detail in this agreement that they sent over is that the county would run the program or the project in terms of the road improvements, but the city would also be responsible for acquiring any right-of-way or easements, or additional right-of-way or additional easements that would go with that. So in the grand scale of things, I would recommend to you that we not participate with the county on this. This is going to be a highly competitive program. To not be the #1 choice for the county, I think will hurt our chances at funding on this. And quite frankly, I don't think we want to muddy the waters, because we have a different item we want to talk to you about tonight. And with that, I'm going to introduce Nathaniel Monaco. He's the Vice President with BG Consulting. And as you recall, we've been working on an analysis of our existing wastewater treatment plant. And to recap that real quickly, our current wastewater treatment plant has a capacity of 750,000 gallons a day. We when that facility was designed, it was designed to easily double the capacity up to 1.5 million gallons per day, and as the city would grow. You could also do some things to incrementally grow that, but knowing that there's an opportunity to maybe use state funding to help cover 75% of the cost, we try to accelerate that analysis as quickly as we could, and that's really the item we're presenting to you tonight. And I'll ask Daniel to go over that in a little more detail, but in essence, it's shaping up to be about a $4 million project to double the capacity of the plant, plus replace or upgrade certain pieces of equipment that are either outdated or nearing their current life expectancy. So it's kind of the full, I guess, update and expansion of the plant. And we think that's going to be around a total $4 million cost, which we also took a look at, would we have $1 million available to do a local match? And we do. So in of the ARPA money or ARPA funds that the city received, you'll see later tonight in your financial report or the next item, we have about $765,000 just in those ARPA funds that haven't been allocated to anything. The only thing we've done with those funds is early on, we identified premium pay for employees, which we took care of that last year, and using this for water or sanitary sewer. So this is certainly fits kind of with our overall picture and certainly fits within the parameters that the state has set out. We also have money we could pull from the city share of the county-wide sales tax that we haven't allocated to anything else. We also have excess funds in our fund balance in the utility accounts beyond our 30% fund balance goals. And we could also take a look at the special sales tax or the infrastructure sales tax we have. There could be funds available there. So it's not going to be that difficult, especially knowing how much we have set aside in our own ARPA funds, which we could use as our local match to get $10 million. So I know I said a lot, but I wanted Daniel to come to kind of talk through why we think, the details associated with how we would spend $4 million at the wastewater treatment plant and how that kind of goes in with the expansions we need to do because of Hills, our continuing conversations with KDHE and remaining capacity, but ultimately why we think this could be a project that would score highly with the Department of Commerce, and primarily based on the economic development activity that this could help spur. So unless you have any questions for me, I think it'd be a good time to transition to Daniel and let him talk a little bit about the details associated with that. Okay, Daniel?
Thank you, George. Appreciate that. As George said, my name's Daniel Monaco with BG Consultants, and been working on the facility plan for the city at the front end of it. And like George said, about just a little shy of 3 weeks ago, we get this notice that there might be all these funds out here. And I've said this to staff, but I kind of think that your project might be the poster child for this particular funding opportunity. It's so much based off of economic development and the ability of a city to utilize and increase, make the economy stronger. You have a facility that's being brought into the community that is directly affecting the water or wastewater treatment facility. And so those two go hand in hand. So throughout the process of what we've looked at so far, we are still in the front end of those items, but understanding this, we have kind of prioritized and looked at what are some real opportunities that we can look for within the facility that are focused on moving us towards that ultimate goal of increasing the capacity, not only for what we know is coming soon, but also, what's the advantages of maybe some future considerations for additional development. And so with that, there's a few items with this application and process. One is that George already mentioned is a 25% match. And the second really big factor is the schedule, okay? Because this application is due Monday. Remember I said we found about this less than 3 weeks ago. It's due Monday. They will announce the awards towards the end of March. And if you are awarded, you'll get half your money in May. And then the following January, no sooner than January of '23, you would get the second half of those dollars. So what we're looking at is to make a application for a $4 million total project, of which the city would provide $1 million in the matching funds and be requesting $3 million in grant funds through this program. And I'll kind of step back, I'll kind of go through, George had mentioned, doubling the capacity. That's our future goal for everything, but because of the schedule components, what we're gonna look at, hopefully we can see this here. When we talk about the doubling of the capacity, I don't know how many of you are familiar, but the carousel aeration is the primary hydraulic and biologic treatment process within the facility. You could call it a racetrack, okay? The wastewater goes through, there's different processes that are going on, but what we're proposing to look at least with this application, is doubling that facility, which would bring up the hydraulic capacity from 0.75 or 750,000 gallons a day to 1.5 million gallons per day. And that effectively, if you may remember, the Hills facility is going to push your current facility at or maybe even above your permitted capacity. And so that would handle that consideration. Future developments that would be included as well, and when I say future, I would call what we're applying for now phase 1. There would be a phase 2, but those things can come on at a little more relaxed schedule, maybe, than what we currently are looking at. But this facility, as George had mentioned, when it was originally designed, looked at an expansion. This facility right here is the digester. It's where the biosolids go in to be treated. It's set up to have another one right next to it. The final clarifiers are down here. There is another process ready to go in for a third one. This application, we are not looking at those two facilities of adding that infrastructure today, but are looking towards items in regards to that will be in the future. So in particular of electrical upgrades, one of the big things would be the SCADA system, the control system that operates everything that your operators utilize to run the treatment plant efficiently and effectively. That needs an upgrade. We're coming up on a generation, 20 years of this plant. And so we would look at implementing those items now because it can be done on a more expedited schedule. We would also look at doing some enhancements or upgrades of the existing facility of the clarifiers and the digesters specifically to upgrade their technology and also ultimately extend the life of some of that equipment that is costly, but also make the water quality better as we go through that. So effectively what we're looking to do is break down into, like I said, doubling the capacity of the major process, put launder covers on the clarifiers, the two existing on the south end. We would go ahead and install one new pump in this pumping station that's already set up. We just have to buy the pump, do some piping and some electrical, because that would set up for when that third clarifier goes in. And that's a process that we can get online, we can get it in process right away, which will benefit on the schedule side of it. I mentioned the SCADA system. We'd look at site piping and electrical upgrades, not only for this phase one portion, but keeping in mind the phase two portion as well. Okay, so that puts the major construction aspect being only of doubling this. The other things can be done parallel without affecting that schedule, so that can be the focus, once again, to strategize to have an efficient schedule to make sure we're done in 2 years. So that's kind of the breakdown. We're going to request $3 million in grant by having the city match it with $1 million. And, you know, we've been working together with George and Dan. And I guess here, if there's any particular questions about this, I would be happy to have them.
I've got one question. First question will be, the 4 million will include doubling the plant. Is that everything you propose to do to the plant?
No, sir.
Okay.
No. That is phase one, and that is a double capacity of that portion. For the full double, i.e. the phase two, we would be looking at adding a third clarifier, adding the second digester. We need to work on the influent pump station, have to upgrade pumps. One of the things that right now we're on course to look at, on the inside of that building right there, as you come in, you have the pumps on the east side, you have the screening inside. That's coming up on 20 years. That is a very aggressive environment. The screen still, it's operated well, it's maintained well, it still is doing well, but it will be one of those items that down the road will become more of an issue. But what the original construction has a second channel. So we would be looking at putting in a new screen in that phase two. Not only being new, it would also be more efficient because the technology is upgraded a little bit, and it would provide finer screening, taking more out, which is important because the long term of this is not only the capacity situation, but you're gonna have new permits coming up in about 4 years, and nutrient removal will become a much bigger issue. You'll create more sludge, which is brought in to that facility. And so it is important that we look at some of those other items.
So the $4 million with the 25% match, that will double the capacity at that point.
No, not the 4 million.
Not the 4 million won't.
There'll be a
it'll take
second
both of them.
phase. Yeah, that'll be a
It'll take
second
both of
phase
them.
that will come in. And don't misunderstand, the second phase is not gonna be in 5 years. When we're done with the facility plan, we'll be back in front of you probably a couple more times here in the next few months. And we'll be discussing that whole plan, so you'll see it all together. Just right now with this opportunity, if we had 3 more months, we'd have everything done, you'd have every question answered. Ultimately, it will cost more than the 4 million. But we see this as an opportunity to get 3 million in grant right now.
George, is there any commitment if we receive approval of the application? I mean, is there any downside to applying at this point without 110% of the information available to us on phase two and all the other stuff?
Yeah, no, I think we're okay to go submit, because even if we had always intended to look at this as a phased approach. And we know that because of Hills coming on in 2 years and our current certification or licensing through KDHE being on a 5-year cycle, we knew that we had a window of opportunity to make those adjustments. What we wanted to look at is if these incremental adjustments we make now, that might be enough, create enough capacity to push Tonganoxie into the next 10, 20 years. Not knowing, we may not get another large capacity user in the business park like the one that we're talking about today. And so I don't think there's really any risk. We've got cash on hand to offer as a local match. We know this is a project that's coming down the pipe anyway. I think we can go after it. And it's such a short window. And as Nathaniel mentioned, I mean, the application submittal is the 28th on Monday. But we have more than enough information looking at the base grant application itself. We've downloaded it several times. It's only about 7 pages total. We've got enough narrative, we have enough of a detailed budget to submit. It's not gonna be rejected on the merits of what we've developed thus far.
And I guess what I'm saying is if we apply and they say, congratulations, you're one of the lucky recipients,
Yes.
we still have the ability to say, oh, thanks, but no thanks, we've changed our mind in accepting the grant. If for something down the road, we get into phase 2 and talking about cost analysis and we say, wow, this is a whole lot more than we were, thinking.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good thing for Nathaniel to clarify. Nothing that we would do as part of this 4 million, and unless I misunderstood what we've done up to this point, will say, hey, you have to immediately go do this additional work. This 4 million gets us to where we need to be for Hills and have generated enough additional capacity that within this next 5-year window with KDHE, there's no issues. And unless we get another really large user that gobbles up any additional capacity we've created here, it's not going to be an immediate concern.
Okay.
So I think 4 million for this project solves a lot of things that we were looking at from a 5 to 10 year window, unless Nathaniel feels differently from the way we were looking at
You
it.
mentioned the screening needing updated with a new, improved screening unit and the sludge, I guess the requirements, that the new permits require, correct? So our permitting is coming up in 4 years.
Yes.
And we will be held to a higher standard in keeping out the sludge or whatever the screening does. I'm using very technical terms, I apologize. So that piece of it will be necessary within the next 4 years prior to that permitting, correct?
Well, either understanding what we would be doing before that, and then you would likely have some time beyond that permitting cycle to look at. And I think I'm hearing the concern of, we don't know every answer yet, and so are we chasing something just to chase it? And my answer is 2 things. One, we are keeping those future regulations and those requirements in mind right now in what we're studying. So that's what we are focusing on. So you will see that here in a few months. You'll see all that program and the effects. As George mentioned, we will be we have been and we will continue to liaison with KDHE throughout this process. We're not going to present you a final recommendation for everything, i.e. phase 1, phase 2, unless KDHE is on board, and they will be on board when we bring that to you. One of the things that George mentioned that is important, and you mentioned it like a good example, is the screen. We are identifying that is an improvement you need to keep in mind. It may not be something that we need to do in the next 5 years to 10 years. But we will already have it identified and understand when it is needed, we already know what we want to do. And that's a big purpose of what the facility plan is for. Any of the design components that ultimately we would move towards after the completion of the facility plan for the phase 1 portions are going to be wrapped into that total package that you will understand and KDHE will be on board with. In response to what happens with the base grant, congratulations, you're awarded. Well, we don't know if we want it yet. To my understanding, you will have the process, like I said, you'll be awarded in March. They will move forward with, there is an agreement between Commerce and the city, and those monies will come in. You will also have to do quarterly reports to them to show progress. And if you ever fall behind there, they're not gonna continue to give you money. And now, I cannot say this for sure, but my assumption would be if you're not making progress and you've already accepted the money and you don't use it, they're gonna probably ask you for it back, okay? And so there might be an off-ramp, if so chosen by the city, to say, okay, well, we're gonna back off on this particular issue. But I don't think you're moving forward into something that's a gray area.
I think there's, for me, I think there's obviously a lot of information still to be considered in a phase two, and heck, even the phase one. But knowing that we're up against a timeline, a deadline on the application, I don't want to wait to gather all that information before applying. And so it seems to me to make sense to apply while the rest of the dust is getting settled on everything else, and then making the decision based on the results of the application. Is that?
I think that's a good summary, and let me add a couple of pieces. This grant and going after the grant is money we're gonna have to spend anyway. So it's asking the state to help be a funding partner in this. Secondarily, we wanted to do this overall analysis so that we know how to build our CMIP budgets moving forward. So it's not like the city won't have any other funds available, but this will be a way when we approach you guys like in May or April when we start talking about CMIP, why staff, when Kent comes before you or Daniel might be here and we're saying, these are our top 3 priorities in the CIP as it relates to sanitary sewer, we'll all know it's because of this bigger analysis that's being done on the overall system and how much of this is going to be in addition to or enhancing what we were able to accomplish with the base grant as well. So it's all stuff we have to do. It's all costs we're going to have to incur, but these are big picture items. These are things that can take well over 10 years, depending on how quickly Tonganoxie is going to grow, or if we get another big user. And so I don't want to paint any sort of picture that we're in dire straits, but we do have things we need to do to expand the current system. And this whole application falls right in within those parameters. It's money we were going to have to spend anyway.
And to be sure, just for clarity, I am fully supportive of the improvements and the expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. And I think this is a fantastic way to get the ball rolling on that. And fantastic, I mean, $3 million in a grant, it's fantastic. I know there's a whole lot of information, additional information, as I said, and I don't think anyone wants to say, hey, let's get $3 million from the state in order to get phase 1 done, and oh, by the way, phase 2 is gonna cost $20 million.
And I think that's a great question to put Daniel on the spot. I mean, BG's our city engineer. Are we spending money now and we do all of this? Is there anything that we'll get accomplished in phase 1 that won't be functional because we'll have to spend money on phase 2?
No, sir. We are looking at this as a total package and trying to pull out the most expedient things to address capacity and the grant schedule. In all honesty, if this wasn't sitting in front of us today, we would have a few more months, 2 to 3 more months of this planning and come to you with this total package. I have no doubt the items that we are looking at would be included. That isn't a question. We are trying to keep, with a view of the finish line in mind, we're trying to look at what can we fit within the city's budget today, i.e. matching funds, and addressing that future consideration. And I think we feel pretty good about where this sits right now. The one other item that I would mention is when this came up, I contacted the state coordinator and said, I have a great project that I'm looking at, and at the time didn't tell him where, but I said, we've just initiated a facility plan that usually takes 6 months of process because we do want to take time. We don't want to rush decisions. And their consideration was, no, that's great. You just keep following. If you feel you can address things directly, go ahead and address them. And I think that's what we're doing now. And we're not spending good money after bad. And in fact, even some of the things that we're looking at doing is looking for that future phase, i.e. a little bit bigger concrete pad, for instance, and the piping ready for the next section when that's needed. Similar to what the total project was done 20 years ago.
What would you estimate the proposed phase one, as you've explained now, what would that take our capacity up to? From 750 to what?
In the hydraulic consideration, the main treatment side of this big facility right here, it will double that component of it. It will also be more efficient and honed in more effectively on the nutrient component, which will be a regulatory issue for you in 4 years. That will be an issue that we will have to address. And so when this was originally designed, it had a mind and an eye towards the future for these nutrients. And so there is already some treatment that is enhanced within the current facility. But when we look at the next one, we're going to take even a bigger factor to that and make sure that we can increase that efficient treatment for those nutrients even more. And so it will address you hydraulically, and it will have the sight on the nutrient regulatory concerns. The issues of the digester and the third clarifier will be then driven by, okay, are we over the 750? Are we running 1 million? How is our sludge? Because one thing that does occur within nutrient removal programs or plants that this is and will become more effective with, you build more sludge. And that will be an issue. So it will become into when is it time? And we'll already have the plan of what we're going to look to do. The current one thing that I did not mention, the current digester has an aeration system that when it was brought on board about 20 years ago, technology, as I said, has advanced, but also it was selected as a little less costly option, okay, which is okay, that happens sometimes. But effectively, they run the plant through the winter without that in operation. That is not a good way. It is tough they do a good job of running their treatment plant with that out of operation because of freezing and consideration. So part of this is to look at a much more effective aeration system, and we'd look at enhancing that one with an eye on the future when needed for the second one.
Any more council members have any questions? Comments?
Just one question, George, back on the road piece.
I was gonna
Totally
come
agree
back
with you.
to it. I was gonna come back to it, but that's fine. Go
Because
ahead.
the county's involved, and we're not number one, I totally understand that. I don't think we have enough time, obviously. We can't get some plan together to put those in. If we did those ourselves without the county. Would we have enough time to put something together? I would almost say no.
Yeah, and so, you know, I don't want to short sell staff. So Bill Knoll, the county engineer, did send over a schedule. We reviewed that with BG, with Jason Hoskinson at BG. It's a very tight schedule. In theory, it works. The problem is it's hard to get contractors. And so we could design it and be ready to go, but the big question is, can we find somebody to go build it within this time? And just not getting a good feeling that that was gonna happen, we decided, let's not, well, my recommendation to you, for you to decide, is I don't wanna muddy the waters at the Department of Commerce by submitting two projects that are related to the Tonganoxie Business Park. And that's why I wanna present it, because the county was gracious enough to consider our request, but I wanted to slot it in a very realistic position that's gonna be submitted to the state in, versus I think this is gonna be a much higher consideration at Commerce as a grant application. And that's why I, again, you know, if we just had another month or so to put it all together. But I think that also relates back to the competitive nature of this. And one of the other base requirements is the maximum you can ask for is $25 million. So that makes me feel like the state is aware that there's probably some big projects out there. So that 100 million gets whittled down fairly quickly. And so I think, much like our EDA grant application, being right around $3 million for the water tower, and that's great to get a grant that's gonna hopefully pay for about half of the water tower, it has to kind of be a right-sized application from a total value. And even though the state won't ever say that, I think that's the realistic approach. And timing, we're ready to go on this. You know, we've already got 5-6 months worth of analysis done. And, you know, like Daniel said, nothing that we're gonna do now is gonna require us to spend funding in phase 2 until we're ready to do that.
You thought getting somebody to do the road piece might be difficult. Do we have that same issue with the sewer piece? I mean, construction, obviously, roads are different than sewer plants. Are we looking at that same issue?
Well, yes, I mean, there is a busyness within the industry right now. But there are qualified contractors, and that is a little bit within. That's why we wanted to focus on this. It is a big piece of the dollars, is doubling that big racetrack, but it's really the only major construction portion. The other pieces could be, you know, some of them would be subcontractors. So it's not one person trying to put 30 people on site for a year to get this done. It will be a very right-sized project for many contractors, both that are experienced, that are a little bit smaller, and some of the real big ones. So I think you'll have a good opportunity with that.
And Mr. Donnelly, and really everyone on council, one other thing that is really an impetus for me as a city manager on this is we've got some key personnel in Public Works that are eligible for retirement, and I think no matter how much I try to talk them out of retirement being as an overrated thing, I think they're gonna be committed to it. I don't want that working body of knowledge to walk out midstream in this project. I want them to stay involved. They know the equipment, they know the manufacturers, they've got 20 plus years of experience. They know what works in our environments and what doesn't. And so they were a critical part in the walkthrough with the facility now. And so I'd really like to kind of keep that portion of the team together. And again, you know, it's just a tight time window. But I think the questions you have, all of you have had tonight are good, because they're questions we've asked, and some are additional questions that we didn't think to ask yet.
So, any more comments or questions? What are you needing from us tonight, George? Do you need a motion, or what do you need?
I was hoping to get a motion from the council that says I would be authorized to submit a grant application that would include a local match of up to $1 million with the expansion of the city's wastewater treatment plant as being our top priority submittal, our only submittal from the city.
And to that end, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I'll make a motion authorizing the city manager to submit a base grant application to the Kansas Department of Commerce for the wastewater treatment plant project.
Okay, we've got a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. Need the roll call, please. Yes.
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 Could I ask, would you send out, George, you went through the list of where the funds were coming from. Would you mind sending that out if you don't? Because I couldn't get it fast enough to, but I know it meets the numbers.
Yes.
You wouldn't
Yeah.
mind, most of it comes in the one chunk.
If I didn't list them in the memo in the packet, I will list it, I'll send it separately with target amounts that we would target from each one of those.
I didn't see it. It may be it's in there, I just missed it.
You know,
The financial report actually has a lot of it.
yeah, and the financial report you'll hear next will have a lot of the dollar amounts. And Mr. Donnelly, it's not in a lot of detail, but it's just listed as 4 bullet points towards the end of the memo that's in the packet. But the bullet points are just simply what the name of the funds are essentially. So we'll marry that with what you're about to hear in the financial report.
Okay, thank you very much. 2022-01 financial report.
For coming. Sorry.
Dan? I'm
Thank-
sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'll be brief because I know I've had a lot of discussion this evening. This is our first monthly financial report of 2022 budget year and calendar year. We had a good January overall. The executive summary, page 1 of the report, highlights that through 1 month, or about 8.3% of the fiscal year, we've collected 19% of revenue estimates and spent a little under 8% of expenditure budget authority across all funds. We have completed our refinancing of Series 2021A temp notes with the proceeds of the recently approved GO Bond 2022A. We have closing scheduled in the next several weeks with 2022B and 2022C series as well. Our debt service obligations have kicked off for the year. We've made the first payments due on the 1st of the year and the 1st of February in the month of January. We also have scheduled our payments that are due at the end of February. So we're about a little under halfway through the year in terms of debt service obligations that we are anticipating. We also received the first of our 2 most significant property tax revenue remittances from the county in January. We forwarded on the library's proportionate share, and I'd like to point out the fund balance at the end of the report shows the 1/2 of the annual RHID 1 increment. RHID again is the Rural Housing Incentive District, and 1 denotes schoolyard townhomes, which was actually on the agenda earlier this evening. So you can see based on the financial report, about half of their annual increment going back to the project is going to be about $19,000. So that's about where we projected it at, close to $40,000 on an annual basis, based on valuation and difference from base valuation. Our library fund does show a small negative fund balance in the financials. I want to point that out because it's a case of us paying for an employee insurance premium, and the library board then pays us back, or they're supposed to advance pay it. We've clarified an issue in our process in which they're going to advance pay multiple months at a time, and so we shouldn't see a negative balance shown in that holding fund in a sense anymore in that circumstance. Our police equipment fund did receive some STEP grant for special traffic enforcement activities they do, equipment reimbursement, and so that's a little over $3,000. And one thing I wanted to highlight, because it was in the bullet point list as number 1 in funding availability, is the ARPA funds. The city currently maintains a little under $340,000 in funding, and we expect another $426,000 in this year's half of the funding. So that total funding remaining after our 1 obligation to date is just under $766,000. So that gets us over 3/4 of the way to that $1 million commitment previously discussed. We approved a small increase to the revenue anticipation and expense for the police equipment reserve fund in the second meeting of this fiscal year. So I'll just keep a running total of those as we move through the fiscal year. Moving to page 2 of the report, major fund revenues, you'll see everything's pretty preliminary. The general fund and debt service fund both are at about 28% of revenue, only 8% in the year. The reason for that, of course, is the property tax remittance. We get one big one in January, one big one in May. And so that shows the obviously a spike there compared to our other normal funds that have a more balanced annual revenue collection trend. Moving to page 3 of 5, our major revenues performance. I've already talked a little bit about property tax, so I won't highlight that. But sales and use tax, which are again some of those other potential opportunities for funding allocation for the city's share of wastewater plant infrastructure updates. So the chart you see there in the middle of that page illustrates in the first 2 sections the general fund and the infrastructure sales tax fund, which again is that 3/4 cent special sales tax. What you see there are trends of year-to-date or January of each year of 2020, 2021, and 2022 revenue. Our collections compared to 2021 were exceedingly positive in January. 18% high for city sales tax compared to last year, 67% high for city use tax. The real number is an adjustment of about $10,000, but as a percentage basis, that's a pretty tremendous result. These are monthly actuals for spending done in November of the year prior. So that's important to remember. It's about a 2-month lag. Moving though to the share of the county sales tax at the bottom of those 3 charts, the percentage change was about 13% higher than last year in county sales tax and almost 50% at 47% for county use tax. So we continue to see growth and strong performance here. We are subject though to monthly variations. People remit at odd schedules, quarterly, biannually, every month when they feel like it. It's really hard to track on a seasonal or monthly scale. So we'll continue to aggregate this month over month and share that trend. But so far so good this year. And we actually just received the February advice of upcoming remittance. And while it didn't exceed last year's, I think on a net basis, the first 2 months are still a positive trend, taking into account January's performance. So all in all, really good news for one of our most important general fund and also equipment and infrastructure funding mechanisms in sales tax. Special highway fund, I won't highlight too much there. We do have good fuel tax returns from the state. We're a little less than last year, but we're higher than 2020, which is a good trend to see. That's a percentage share of a cents per gallon basically charge assessed to sales. So that reflects fuel sales. As fuel sales go up and down, the state's revenue and our share of the revenue go up and down as well. Our last big dip in that was the Great Recession in 2009, 2010, and we weathered COVID with decent performance, and we'll continue to monitor it, but we don't see any reason for big concern, a precipitous decline in that. Any
Question on
questions?
that.
Yeah.
One of our representatives in Washington, along with others from other states, are proposing that we cancel the fuel tax for the rest of the year. How will that affect us if that gets passed?
The short-term impact of
That funds the highway.
it does. So we are fortunate in that we have, I think, our strongest fund balance in many years in the highway fund because of excise tax collections with our development activity at the business parks and residential as well. We have a strong reserve to draw from to accommodate any temporary dip from the state. Last year, we actually did have a makeup remittance from the state. They temporarily kind of slowed down what they gave out to the cities and counties. And then they, at the end of the year, said, oh, we're all right. We'll go ahead and make you whole, in essence. So that would be interesting, Mr. Donnelly, if that took effect.
I don't know if it'll go or not, but it's being floated.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably a revenue we shouldn't project with absolute certainty especially as fuel prices change too. That changes things. Any other questions on special highway? Moving to the fourth page of the report, highlighted are the items actually that we addressed tonight, and I apologize, the second bullet point, sales tax proceeds, was not on the agenda tonight, but I didn't unhighlight it. But again, we already talked about the TBA funding request, the Arts Council and Historical Society, and then under utilities, our utility plant improvement analysis and corresponding capital projects. So we're making progress already, just 2 months into the year, on our list of big ticket priorities and initiatives. And finally, the last page of the report, page 5 of 5, shows coming up here the next month in March, spring retreat and CMIP discussions over the next 2 months, kicking off our 2023 budget development. One thing we've added to in this report is the last heading, anticipated 2023 budget development topics. As we go through the year, it's easy to talk about something and let it fall off the consciousness. As we talk about high priority things or things that we maybe want to come back to and address in a budget setting, we're keeping them in this list. So if the council has anything to add or remove or comments at any time, this is to keep it top of mind for all of us and hopefully be useful as we go into those work sessions to get back on it. And finally, the last page is the fund balance report for all funds, and happy to take any questions. Thanks for your attention.
Any questions, council members? Good report. Thanks, Dan. City Attorney agenda.
No items.
Okay. Under Mayor Pro Tem, I think George pretty well explained the road out by the business park, and that's a lot of the conversations I've had with the county. We've got city council agenda.
Just a quick mention of the presidential award that was awarded to the city from the Tonganoxie Business Association last Tuesday at their dinner.
Okay.
Dan and I and the mayor were there too.
Great.
And Mo McCutcheon and Tammy McCutcheon, we were all there. And we all accepted that award on behalf of the city. So is it hanging at City Hall yet?
It is on our front counter in proud
Fancy.
display.
I
We'll
love
have to
that.
find a permanent location.
Cool. That's it.
I believe we have an executive session. Mr. Donnelly?
Yep. I would move that the city council recess into executive session to discuss the city manager's annual review process pursuant to the personnel matters of non-elected personnel exception, KSA 75-4319B1. The open meeting will resume in the city council chambers at 9:20?
That's what I was thinking.
9:20.
Okay.
Executive session will include city attorney, city manager and assistant city manager, and George, you'll probably get booted.
So you might as well stay put. Save yourself the walk. Okay,
I second.
okay, we got a motion, we got a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting, let the record show no binding action was taken in executive session.
Get that on the calendar.
Is there anything else anybody'd like to discuss?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I would like to make a motion in regard to the city manager's compensation package that for the next year, base salary be increased by 6.5% and a 2% rate increase to deferred compensation.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Your roll call.
Rocky Hempel,
Yes.
Chris Donnelly,
Yes.
Jacob Dale,
Yes.
Jennifer McCutcheon.
Yes.
Okay, I need a motion.
With that, I motion that we adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion. We got a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Done deal.